Welcome to the WuBlockchain podcast. For the latest insights in blockchain and crypto, don't forget to subscribe to WuBlockchain on YouTube and Twitter. Stay informed and join the conversation. Today, we are excited to have Jason Zhao, co-founder of Story, joining us to discuss how they are redefining intellectual property IP management for the digital age through blockchain and programmability. Let's dive in. Could you please introduce yourself and Story?
Yes, I'm excited to be here and thanks for having me on. So, a little bit about myself. I'm one of the co-founders of Story. And before Story, my background is a little bit mixed, more on the AI space, more on the technical side. So, I graduated from Stanford with a degree in philosophy for my undergraduate degree. And then I started to do some computer science research as well at Stanford. So, I also got a master's in computer science at Stanford, where I focused on AI research. And I spent some time doing some research under Fei Li in the computer vision lab at Stanford. And after I graduated from Stanford, I actually went to DeepMind, Google's DeepMind, which is their AI lab. And there I focused on taking cutting edge research coming out of AlphaGo and AlphaZero and this sort of reinforcement learning AI models and finding ways to take that reinforcement learning research and apply it to real commercial products. So, the difference between a research paper and an actual product that can generate revenue is very, very vast. And my role at DeepMind as the youngest product manager there was to basically take the research and find new products that could be built using that new technology. I got really excited by blockchain around DeFi summer. So around that time, I started reading and rereading the Bitcoin, Ethereum, Uniswap, and Maker white papers. And I was just really inspired because first and foremost, I think there's a lot of philosophical elements in blockchain where these smart contracts and these decentralized technologies are actually meant to build a new kind of internet, the fabric for a new type of society. And I actually thought that the philosophy, the libertarian ethos behind blockchain was really exciting. So that philosophy element was really interesting to me because I had studied philosophy. And so that was interesting. And then also another thing that really excited me about the blockchain space was the potential for research to go into production very, very quickly. So in blockchain, because everything is mostly open source, because smart contracts are unstoppable pieces of software, people can actually easily build on top of existing protocols. And that really accelerates the pace of research in the open. And so I love the sort of evolutionary speed and scale of blockchain research that was happening. So that's kind of what got me excited about blockchain. And that was when I met my co-founder, SY, and we started Story together. And the vision of Story is really to build a blockchain that brings an entirely new type of asset class on chain. So we think a lot about, of blockchains and how they intersect with money. I think Bitcoin is, digital gold, Ethereum and Solana, and to some degree Ripple are competing to be this sort of global payments layer. But blockchains can do so much more than just finance. And intellectual property is this 61 trillion US dollar asset class. It's one of the biggest asset classes in the world. It encompasses scientific research. It encompasses trademarks like the biggest brands in the world. And it also, of course, includes creative works like songs and movies and comics and so much more, right? So it's a very comprehensive asset class, but it's one that has never moved on chain. And I think it's only going to become more important to have a sort of fully on-chain, peer-to-peer IP system in the age of AI, because you're already starting to see AI is completely shaping the way that we think about intellectual property. It's creating a lot of different problems as well as opportunities, right? So you can see that OpenAI, for example, is engaged in a lawsuit with the New York Times. At the same time, OpenAI is also paying Fox, which is another major news corporation in the US, $10 million a year. And so you have this sort of free-for-all where there are no rules. And I think it's really important that blockchains can create a new type of market, a much more efficient market for IP than the traditional legal system. So our goal is to create win-win situations where AI progress can accelerate and people who hold IP, these IP owners, can generate revenue from their IP being used in the training of AI models. So that's the thesis of Story. We've worked with some of the world's biggest AI companies like Stability AI, and we also work with some of the biggest IPs in the world. We recently announced that we acquired Justin Bieber's Peaches, which is obviously a huge IP, one of Justin Bieber's top songs. And so I think we have both the AI angle as well as the IP angle, and that's a core focus of what we're doing and have been doing for the past 3 years at Story.
And so what inspired you to tackle modern IP challenges through blockchain technology?
Yeah, for me, it was really, as I mentioned, the possibility of doing something brand new with blockchains and creating a market for one of the world's largest asset classes. And then also, given my experience in AI, I really thought that the IP problem is one of the biggest problems that you can face in AI. If you think about what drives AI progress, there's three major pillars. The first is compute. The second is models, the model architecture, and the third is IP or the data. And just going over them one by one, if you look at compute, you're starting to see hundreds of billions, almost trillions of dollars of investment into accelerating data centers and making compute really, really cheap. So I think compute is an area where that's going to continue to get cheaper and to some extent is going to become a commodity. And then you're going to have models. And of course, the DeepSeek model recently has been really, really successful, and it's been very, very cheap, right? It only cost $10 million to create the DeepSeek model. So I think, with these new generation of open source models, a lot of the model architecture is going to be super open source, and that's going to become a commodity to some degree as well. So if you can imagine that both the model layer as well as the compute layer are sort of being open sourced in many ways, or at least getting a lot cheaper, you then ask, like, where is the scarcity? Where is the value going to flow? What are the real bottlenecks in AI progress? It's not going to be in compute. It's not going to be in the model architecture. The real bottleneck is going to be on the data or the IP layer, because in order to develop a great AI model, you have to have a lot of data and you have to have a lot of great IP. If you have really bad IP or not enough, you cannot train a great model. But there's a big problem, which is that almost all the IP or almost all the data in the internet has already been scraped. And so 99% of the open internet is already included in these existing AI models. And so I think where value is going to really be accrued is on the edges, in the proprietary IP that hasn't been trained on yet. There's going to be a ton of value in all these large AI companies, the open AIs of the world, the Anthropics of the world. They're all going to have to pay a lot. They're going to be forced buyers of IP, and IP is going to be what differentiates them and sets them apart from each other. And so I think IP is going to become very valuable. So my experience at DeepMinds and my focus on AI kind of led me to realize that building a blockchain-based market for intellectual property is going to unlock one of the biggest opportunities and also solve one of the biggest problems in AI today.
Why is the current IP infrastructure outdated, and what problems are you solving with Story?
Yeah, so the current IP architecture is, it's very, I would say, old school. It's very traditional. It's very slow and it's very expensive. So the basic way that IP, which again is an asset class, it's like the $61 trillion asset class, the way that people trade and leverage this asset right now is they have to have hundreds of lawyers on both sides of a transaction. And so unless you're a massive international corporation, or you're one of the top, let's say, IP holders in the world, you cannot access IP. You can't license your IP, you can't sell your IP, you can't buy IP unless you have this massive legal team. And the entire copyright, patent, trademark system, it still runs on basically a pen and paper process, a very, very old school process that's very expensive. And there's very, very, very little transparency into that process. And every single major government in the world does their IP system in a different way, which creates a lot of inefficiencies, right? So this is a very similar story to how Ethereum and Bitcoin have started to replace traditional banking systems, right? The same problems of everything is focused on these complicated banking procedures. Every single country has a different banking regulation, has different policies. That's all very, very slow and increases the transaction cost. And so what crypto is doing for money is to make that super transparent and super efficient by having money moved on chain. I think Story is trying to do a very similar thing by replacing, or at least making more efficient, this very traditional, very old school pen and paper legal system where only the largest players have the resources to participate. We think every individual person, everyone with a WeChat account, everyone with an Instagram account, everyone with a Facebook account, they all hold IP, right? You're all posting images of yourself. You maybe create artwork, or you may be doing scientific research. Everyone in the world owns IP, but not everyone in the world has access to it. And so I think that's why it's so important to have a sort of open, very efficient, and very public IP system that is global and doesn't have to deal with the complexities, so to speak, of every single different regulation in every single different country.
Given the diverse global IP regulations, does Story adapt its license to regional legal frameworks or is aiming for universal applicability?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we're starting off by really focusing on a framework that can apply globally. We're really, lucky that copyright law is pretty global by now. There was this, it's kind of 100 years, over 100 years ago, but there was a Berne Convention, which was a convention that, I think over 180 countries signed a basic agreement to harmonize and unify the basic tenets of copyright law around every country in the world. And that's the reason why, even though Pokemon is maybe a Japanese IP, that doesn't mean that you can just use Pikachu all over the place in the United States, for example, right? So that's because copyright laws have generally been globalized. So we've kind of started with copyright as a focus because it is so global already. And we really think that blockchains, one of the big benefits is that it's truly global, right? So the goal has always been to create a basic set of frameworks that works around the world. Obviously, there are complexities with that. I think enforcement differs based on the country. And so there will be some differences in enforcement, but I think the first step is to just create a standard framework, which we've done, that works around the entire world.
How does the programmable IP license bridge the gap between blockchain-based IP and traditional legal system?
Yeah, so our goal is really to take the legitimacy that's been established by the traditional legal system and bring it on chain. So we don't necessarily want to kind of blow up the legal system, right? I think that's not necessarily our goal. Our goal is to make it more efficient. In the same way that, think about stable coins, right? Like a USDC or USDT, it's kind of pegged to the US dollar. So it's not necessarily trying to like completely reshape what a dollar is. It's just trying to make a US dollar way more efficient by making it a token that's on a blockchain that can be traded on a decentralized exchange, that can have access to all of DeFi, that has access to global liquidity. So think about the same idea, but applied to the legal system, right? Because ultimately, we're not going to replace the court system. We're not going to replace every single lawyer in the world, but what we will do is make transacting with IP as an asset class 100x, if not 1000x cheaper and more efficient. And so that's what the programmable IP license is meant to do, which is a first of its kind legal document. And I think for every dollar that we've invested into the blockchain and the layer one, we've invested almost as much into the legal side and to build like this very, very innovative legal framework where every single smart contract term set around every single IP asset on Story is mapped one-to-one with the terms on this legal contract. So every single IP asset on Story is actually backed by the law, almost in the same way that you might imagine like a USDC or USDT is backed by a US dollar or a cash equivalent. So I think that's really innovative about what we've done is to really tie the best of both worlds, getting the legal power, legal legitimacy, legal scope with the programmable IP license, but then actually bringing all of the settlement and execution and enforcement on chain, which is way more efficient to have this software-based IP system.
Also, as you mentioned before, the programmable IP license adheres to global conventions like the Berne Convention. How does this ensure the protocol's applicability across international jurisdictions?
Yeah, so the Berne Convention is the sort of convention I was talking about earlier, and it's I'm not a legal expert, but basically the idea is that in I believe 1886 or 1880, many countries around the world got together to align fundamentally that their copyright laws would share the same basic frameworks. And what that allows Story to do is to say that we can sort of create a basic programmable IP license that applies around the world. And so that's why when you asked whether Story is focusing on region by region or a truly global IP system, that's why we're able to have this truly global peer-to-peer IP system is because already today, most copyright frameworks are very aligned between countries.
Story raised $80 million in its Series B funding round led by A16Z, bringing total funding to $140 million. What do you think convinced A16Z to back Story at every stage, from seed to Series B?
Yeah, so first of all, we're very, very fortunate to have A16Z lead every single round from our seed round to our Series A round to our Series B rounds. They've actually tripled down and they've been the lead in every single round and invested over $100 million into Story. And I think that, Chris Dixon and Sriram and Eddie and the rest of the team at A16Z have been extremely strong supporters. And to me, obviously you have to ask them what their conviction is. But in my mind, I think the number one thing that they really believe in and they see in Story is a blockchain that is going to do something entirely new and not take out, but make more efficient one of the most important parts of any country, any society, which is their IP and the ideas, right? And so I think that it's so different and unique compared to all the different blockchain protocols focused on DeFi, right? Which almost becomes a little bit of a zero-sum game. You have 10, 20, 30 DeFi chains all competing for the same 10,000 crypto users. It can be very difficult to invest in something like that. Whereas Story is kind of building this next generation of blockchains where, there's basically no one working on this problem, but the opportunity size is in the many trillions of dollars. And we have the ability to really work with governments around the world to be the default IP system. And I think this is just a completely new market that blockchains haven't tapped into. And also, I think our focus on AI is really compelling. If you think about a lot of what has been happening in the intersection of crypto and AI, a lot of it is just taking something that already exists in the traditional AI world and making it decentralized, which is interesting, but not always the most commercially viable, right? Because if you can do something in a centralized way, the decentralized version might actually be more expensive and more complex. When you think about Story, we're actually adding an entirely new layer to the AI stack. And that's why we've been able to do deals with companies like Stable Diffusion or Stability AI, which is the largest image diffusion model, most popular image generation model in the world, right? Why are they working with Story? Well, they haven't actually, I don't think any other major AI company or any other blockchain company has worked with any major AI company except for Story, right? And the reason why is because we're doing something that's new to Stability and that's very valuable to them. And it's not just taking like an existing part of the AI stack and decentralizing it, right? So I think the combination of the total size of the IP asset class and how new this sort of approach is that Story is taking, as well as our intersection with AI, which is obviously probably the largest, most important technologies of our generation. I think that's really exciting to them. And if you read like Chris Dixon's book called Read, Write, Own, there's almost a chapter it seems to me that's like very, very similar to Story's vision, right? So I think that we just shared the same vision. And we have been executing on this vision and have a lot of really strong traction over 3 years. So that's I think what has led them to sort of double down. And we're based in Silicon Valley too, right? So I think when it comes to backing blockchain teams, it's really important to back highly skilled engineering teams. And almost all of our engineers are based in Palo Alto in our office in the Silicon Valley. And we're basically 5 minutes away from Stanford. We're 1 or 2 minutes away from the Aptos and SWE offices, which are also in Palo Alto. And I think there's just a lot of technical talent on the team that gives us a lot of credibility, right? So I think some sort of combination of all these things probably helped us to get this sort of backing from A16Z. But obviously, I feel like super lucky to have their support. And they've been very, very, helpful and very supportive along our journey.
Do you see Story's founding success as a signal of growing institutional interest in blockchain-based IP solutions?
Absolutely. I think that what we've seen with the recent U.S. elections, as well as the Bitcoin ETFs and other exchange traded products, and the Ethereum ETF as well, is that the largest institutions in the world, as well as the world's largest governments, are starting to adopt crypto and bring it into the mainstream, right? And so, what makes me so excited about Story, especially this year, is that IP is something that every mainstream institution cares about. It's something that the government cares so much about, but it's something that's so inefficient. IP right now is way more inefficient than Wall Street or banks were when Bitcoin was invented. So we actually are tackling an even more antiquated, even more inefficient system than banks. And I think that's really exciting. So, I'm talking to folks that are close to or working in the US government. I'm talking to folks that are working on other world governments. And we're very, very excited about bringing Story to governments as well as some of the largest AI companies in the world. Both of those are happening. And, I'm really excited to just continue pushing down that path because I truly see a world where Story is the single default IP system of every government in every country in the world. And I think that future is not as far as we think. I think that blockchain is just a superior way of tracking ownership of different assets at scale. And what better asset to do that than with intellectual property, which is currently one of the most inefficient asset classes in the entire world.
What role do you see governments playing in the adoption of on-chain IP systems. Are there any partnerships or dialogues with regulators that you can share?
Yeah, so I can't share anything right now, but I can tell you that this is an active area of focus for us, something that we're really excited about and just starting to dip our heads into, to be honest. So, it's still early days for us, but I think that when it comes to governments, I can tell you that there's a lot of interest in general from governments in automating and digitizing their patent system, their trademark system, and their copyright system. As I mentioned before, most countries, have a very, very pen and paper, very opaque, very, very slow IP system, and that costs governments not just thousands of dollars, but probably many, many millions of dollars. And so blockchain it's designed to solve this problem. It's designed to provide ownership at scale. It's designed to allow for easy exchange of different assets. It's designed to track the provenance and attribution and history of an asset. And these are all basic fundamental concepts to IP. So I think that, the bar is pretty low right now for what exists today and what governments are using, but the stakes are very high. And I think that gap is where Story is going to be able to succeed and hopefully embed ourselves at the deepest levels and at the highest levels with these governments.
What specific aspect of Story, technical innovation, vision, or market potential resonating most with A16Z and your other investors?
Yeah, I think, two things. The first and foremost is that, in my opinion, and I think in a lot of our investors' opinion, blockchain's killer application is to create new digital markets. If you think about what blockchain has done in the past 10 years, we've really focused and maybe even over focused on money as one type of asset and currency as one type of asset. But there have been basically no new types of assets brought on chain beyond financial assets. And to me, and to our investors, I think it's really exciting to see a highly technical Silicon Valley based team that is willing to try and reinvent the idea of what a blockchain can be for an entirely new asset class and one that is so outdated that it is absolutely ripe for disruption, right? And then the second part of this is that AI is completely changing the landscape of IP. So it's not just that existing IP solutions are inefficient, it's that existing IP in that entire system as we know it is no longer viable. I think AI is killing traditional IP. And so to have this massive technological trend of AI intersect with IP in the world of blockchains, I think that is also really compelling to some of our investors. And this intersection of AI and IP and bringing new assets and applying them to the biggest, most exciting technology in the world right now, which is AI. I think the combination of those things, as well as our technical excellence, I think those are the things that have really drawn investors to Backstory. And ultimately, a lot of the advice and support we've gotten from A16Z and our other investors has led us to get to this point.
Oh, beyond founding, how has A16Z supported Story's goals?
Well, I think A16Z has been, I think they have one of the most reputable brands in the world. I think A16Z is probably, if not, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they're actually the largest venture capital fund in the world by assets under management, right? So Chris Dixon and the other investors at A16Z have lent us their brand. They've made really, really powerful introductions to people in the US. Obviously, like our former investor, Sri Ramakrishnan, is now a part of the White House, and he's part of, he's the AI advisor to the White House. So, he's already in Washington, D.C., working in this new administration. So I think the sort of reach and the scale and the brand of A16Z has been really useful. But also, A16Z has, many tens of employees working on the crypto team that help with everything from engineering to research. For example, the CTO at A16Z, his name is Eddie Lazar, and we're very close to him. Our office used to be a 5-minute walk from his house, and he would help us design the early protocol. So I think on the engineering side, they've also been extremely helpful. So overall, it's all across the board. They're really, really, incredible investor, and we're very lucky to have them in our camp.
And what differentiates Story's programmable IP infrastructure from other blockchain-based IP solutions?
Yeah, so I think that first and foremost, I think there haven't been many IP solutions, if at all, in the blockchain space. I think that most IP in the blockchain space has been very simple, static JPEG, right? It's just like an image or like a song. And I think what Story is doing is so much more than just storing a file on chain. I think IP has never really been implemented successfully in blockchain because people just They just move a media file on chain, and it's just like a static pointer to a media file. But what IP is, it's about how can you actually make that media file programmable? And what that means is how can you not only give every single asset on Story legal backing through the programmable IP license, but actually set the terms for how other people can monetize and use and expand your IP. So we have this concept of IP Legos, where every single IP on Story can be used in any app that's connected to Story. So we have, tens, if not hundreds soon, of applications that are built on Story. If an IP is created on one of them, it can actually be used on all 99 other apps seamlessly. There's not a single thing that needs to be done. Story handles all the payments, all the usage. It tracks how it's being used. And so imagine if this is applied to the entire internet, where every single image you see on Twitter can instantly be used in an AI model, or every single asset you see posted on someone's WeChat story can be used to create a comic seamlessly without having to have any legal interaction. It's just all happening under the hood on the blockchain. That's really the concept of programmable IP, is that every single media file, every single piece of scientific research that you see on the internet is on chain and fully composable across any application. That's our end goal.
So how does Story adjust issue like AI-based content remixing and attribution?
Yeah, so one thing that we've done is you can almost think of Story as the world's, potentially as we scale, the world's largest training set, right? So every single IP, the many millions of IP that is being registered on Story, there is a term that allows the owner of that IP to declare whether they want AI to train on it, and if so, how much that AI model trainer has to pay, if at all. And so every single asset on Story has this sort of AI rights associated with it. And so if you're OpenAI, if you're Google DeepMind, you can actually go look at the millions of IP assets on Story and decide which ones you want to use. And with one click, license all of them and compensate the creators as well. I think that's a completely novel concept. Right now, if you're a large model company, either you're having to do these very, very expensive licensing deals that are very slow as well. Or, in some sense, it's actually kind of impossible for a company like Google DeepMind to do 10 million licensing deals to get 10 million images, right? That's not feasible for them either. But Story simplifies this process and creates a very seamless market for that IP exchange. So that's kind of how we're focused on this AI problem.
ERC-6551 or token bulk accounts is a key feature of Story. Could you explain how this standard enhances traditional NFTs and their role in IP management?
Yeah, so 6551 is really an important part of what we're doing at Story, because ultimately we want to make every single IP asset sovereign. We want to make every single piece of content on the internet sovereign and have its own wallet, have its own sort of preferences, have its own terms and conditions. And unlike legal terms and conditions, which are just on a piece of paper, the terms and conditions of each IP asset, these programmable terms can be enforced because we have a token bound account associated with every single IP on Story. So every single IP on Story has its own wallet. When that IP generates revenue, revenue goes into its own wallet. If that IP owes some portion of its revenue to another IP that it is maybe inspired by or derived from, that revenue would flow automatically through Story, right? So what we're doing is really giving a wallet in a smart contract account to every single IP asset, and that makes them programmable and that makes them sovereign. So it's kind of at the core of the technology that we're building.
How do you ensure data stored on-chain for IP rights remains accessible and verifiable over the long term, especially as blockchain networks evolve?
Yeah, so right now we've worked with storage partners like IPFS and Arweave to be able to store this media in a decentralized and sustainable and very, very long term, in the case of Arweave, permanent way. In the future, I'm not ruling out the possibility of us potentially building our own storage solution in addition, that will solve a lot of the problems that we're facing right now in Story. But right now we think that there's some decent storage solutions that we're leveraging, but in the future we hope to kind of improve that ourselves as well, because obviously storage is a big part of making sure that IP is available forever. And if we're truly a global IP system, we're truly housing and being the home of all the world's knowledge and creativity, then we need to make sure that the storage is decentralized and permanent.
Does Story plan to integrate with other blockchain ecosystems to enhance cross-chain IP interoperability?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the vision that we have for Story is that it is a core piece of infrastructure for the entire internet. And so already we're working with applications that don't have anything to do with blockchain. We're working with Web2 applications that have 2.5 million Web2 users, and they don't know what the blockchain is, right? So we want to be able to support IP that's off chain. We want to support IP that's on any other blockchain, and we want to support IP that's on Story. Story is the IP layer for the entire internet. And so certainly we are very open to engaging in cross-chain interactions to make sure that IP that's on other chains is actually stored on Story.
What challenges do you foresee in gaining regulatory acceptance for on-chain IPs, and how are you addressing them?
Yeah, so I think that with all new technologies, there's going to be an education barrier. But I think that right now, given the political situation in the U.S., a lot of blockchain entrepreneurs and blockchain and crypto friendly people are in the government. So I think it's really a unique opportunity to make a huge impact there, right? So there's definitely going to be a lot of education that we have to do. But the good thing is we've already gotten really good at doing that because we work with a lot of the world's biggest Web2 IPs and Web2 AI companies. We've learned to speak that language, and I think it's going to be no different when we go to, people in Washington D.C. or other countries and other heads of state around integrating blockchain. Right? It's about being able to speak their language, and I think IP, fortunately for us, is a language that everyone speaks, and I think it's going to be a real advantage for us as we try to scale.
Story has seen impressive activity during its testnet phase, with millions of daily transactions. What has driven this early engagement?
Yeah, I think that it's really excitement for something that's brand new. It's excitement for something that doesn't look like anything else. If you look at our ecosystem, you're not going to find just a bunch of forks of dexes and forks of lending protocols. You're going to find applications that don't even look like any other blockchain application because what we're doing is entirely new. So I think that's one big factor is just the novelty. And there's a whole massive set of users, both Web 2 and Web 3, that have been waiting for something like this. And, I don't think any other blockchain is really satisfying that demand. So a lot of that demand did come to Stories for our testnet. And I think I'm really happy with how the technology held up, despite having, I think now it's almost 3 million or maybe even more than 3 million transactions per day. I think it's really good for a testnet phase.
What initiatives are in place to attract developers and expand the ecosystem? What are the key differentiating standpoints of the Story ecosystem?
Yeah, so in terms of developer adoption, we are really a developer focused company. So everything we do is for other builders. Everything we do is to enable developers to build best in class IP experiences. And so we have a very extensive set of developer focused onboarding videos. Our documentation is updated every week, if not every day. It's one of the most up to date and comprehensive documentations you'll find. And we've even streamlined our documentation so that it's really easy for AI agents to train on it. And I actually think the quality of our documentation, we've gotten feedback from a lot of AI builders and AI agent builders that our documentation is really easy for other agents to understand. And so agents themselves can actually use our documentation and train on it to build apps on Story. So we've done a lot to optimize for developers. We're also working on an effort that will be released soon, which is a really, really developer friendly, beautiful, slick front end SDK, kind of like a Stripe checkout for IP. And we're really excited to reveal that to the world. But that's something that we've been working on is creating delightful developer experiences.
Could you share any upcoming milestones or expansions the community should look out for?
First and foremost, I think our public mainnet is launching very, very soon. And so that's definitely going to be a huge moment for us. But at the end of the day, the public mainnet is not the finish line. It is very much just the very start of the race, right? So there's going to be a lot of updates in 2025 that I'm excited to share. And we have some exciting announcements in IP coming up next week. But I think the biggest one for sure is the public mainnet launch that's going to come quite soon. So I'm really looking forward to that. I think the whole team is working very hard to make that happen, and that'll be the biggest thing that we're all looking forward to as a community.
Anything else you'd like to share with our audience?
No, I mean, I just really appreciate you for the time. And also, thank you to the audience for taking the time to learn more about Story. If you want to learn more, if you're a developer, you can look at our documentation, which is docs.story.foundation. Our ecosystem is really easily accessible at our ecosystem page at ecosystem.story.foundation. And we also have, a very extensive, very live Twitter. So you can follow us on Twitter and you'll find all the latest updates there.
Okay, thank you, Jason, for sharing your insights into Story and its vision for the future IP.
Thank you so much for having me.
Mhm.